and welcome to another edition of the Webcomic Beacon here at webcomicbeacon.com, part of the Webcast Beacon network at webcastbeacon.com. I'm Fess, and this week it's another round of webcomic review as well as Comic of the Week. With that, let's get into our comic to review of the week. Here's a comic I actually am familiar with and I used to read a long time ago. During a recent webcomic review submission opening, I received a request to review this comic. Well, as I said, this is a comic I read and followed, though it was years ago. I actually stopped reading for a few reasons, and one of the main reasons was it went on into an indefinite hiatus and had an artist change. I'm not saying that the change of the artist was the issue. I'm saying that the hiatus was likely induced by an artist change, more or probably because an artist couldn't keep up with the updates or something. Many webcomics still function as a labor of love. That means that the creator or creative team are working on a comic without being paid for their time and their work. About 7 years ago, the model of webcomics was to present the work for free online in hopes that you could then sell the comic or merch to your audience later, thus making up the cost of the work. Sadly, that doesn't work unless you can get a huge audience within 2 years. A lot of free time and dedication is needed for your webcomic, else they usually tend to die within 3 to 5 years for sure, even with all of that ambition that you had for your comic. So, a lot of times, artists tend to go where they can get paying gigs, which is why a lot of hobby webcomics tend to die off as the artist goes elsewhere for either commission work, freelance work, or a different paying gig on a comic. Though I'm not sure of the story behind what happened to the comic I'm going to review, but an artist dropping out is certainly one cause of a webcomic going on hiatus. And a hiatus is a huge cause of a webcomic's audience shrinking. So, let me revisit a webcomic I used to read, and let's see where it takes me. This week's review is Mysteries of the Arcana by Jay Gray and multiple artists. Found at mysteriesofthearcana.com. Of course, let's first start by taking a look at the website, like I always do. All around, black background. Better than an all-white background, but can still have a negative effect on the eye, like making the whites and the light colors feel too bright. But I'll move on from there. My biggest gripe is going to be the huge ad that's next to the logo. This is where my eye goes right away. Not to the comic, not to the logo, but the ad. The choice to have an ad this size just pushes the comic down. The comic is what you want people to see. The header takes up way too much space on this website. Moving on. The logo is actually fine, though it could be better if redesigned to take up much less space, with also less of an ad too. Navigation above and below the comic, menu bar on the left side, other ads and links on the right, blog below the comic. Overall, this website isn't bad. It's functional and with decent enough design elements, although the design is a bit dated and can use some updating. Though it does work just fine. The biggest thing I'd recommend is redesigning the header. Cutting it by at least half, if not by, 66%. Anyway, let me move on to the art now. As I hinted earlier, this comic has gone through some art changes, and this does make it a bit difficult to really give a full-on review, but I'll give it a shot. Since this is a story-based comic, let's look at the earlier work. And just full disclosure, I did read the entire comic all over again for this review. With the earlier work, the art isn't fabulous. It's a little amateur, though. As the story progresses, the art does get better fairly quick. I always like seeing the art process when I read webcomics. It could be the artist in me that likes seeing that progression. Anyway, the characters are drawn much better than any background. most of which are just colors, gradients, or some other less defined design. And when there are structures and environments and rooms, I mean, they're just not the strength of the artist. Especially with structures, a little bit of perspective, things are a little bit more stiff, but certainly excels a lot more in the character designs, even though there's still a few things that are not quite right about them. However, the characters tend to be very expressive and dynamic enough that it helps a lot in the storytelling and the character interaction. That, and I do like the main character designs a lot. There are similar things I have issue with the latest artwork too, though I won't keep going on since I'd just be repeating myself. There is also a sequence in the archives that are mostly random blog posts with unrelated artwork. These should definitely be separated from the main archive, as it definitely messes up anyone reading through. It's unrelated stuff, probably during the hiatus, that probably doesn't need to be there anymore, especially in the main archive. That aside, the bottom line is it's going to be the characters or the story that's really going to be keeping you on this one. Which brings me to the writing. The story begins with the meeting of two worlds, or arcanas. One character happens across another, and aside from some reality clashing, adventure ensues. Basically, an arcana is a parallel world, and there are several of them. So we get a mix of a few different worlds to pick characters from, and for which to set our adventures in. That they kind of range from fantasy to sci-fi, but most of this looks to be what we would consider as fantasy. Though I think a couple of worlds tend to be a little bit more on the sci-fi side. The main human character, Teresa, is our reader analog, the explain-at-it character for the reader. She's also a complex character that has issues that need to be worked out. When we get right down to it, I don't really like her backstory. It's almost the trope of the female badass because horrible things have happened to her. And yes, it's probably what you're thinking about. To be fair, there is a lot more going on with the backstory than just that thing. Basically, things have been pretty shitty for her. She ends up meeting this elf girl named, let's see if I can say it right, Crystalline? Which ends up messing with her. Not that she's harassing her, but mostly because everything is messing with and challenging Teresa's world views and rooted beliefs. Oh, and we get a humanoid dog that kind of looks like an Egyptian god. So there's that. So these are going to be like our three main characters, and there's also like a little fairy character named, I think her name's Mandrake as well. So that's really our four main characters for the most part. A lot of the webcomics archive is pushed forward with adventures, not misadventures, that push characters' dynamics into each other, as well as letting us learn about the worlds or arcanas. For those that know me, needless to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, that is what really gets me into the comic. The characters. There is an exposition storyline that talks about the history of the arcanas, where I got really disinterested at the time it was updating. I'll be fair, too. It was also kind of after or during an artist change, so it didn't have a reliable schedule at the time, so I just lost interest, and it wasn't like the parts of the comic that I liked before, and were the reason why I kept reading it. Well, overall, my experience with reviewing a webcomic that I used to read went on hiatus, and I stopped reading, and then started updating again. Well, I really liked revisiting the older archives and getting a little nostalgic. I powered through the inconsistent artist part and the exposition storyline. Really, I just kind of wanted to see the characters back in an adventure. At the time of this review, we are several pages into a storyline with a new antagonist, so I'm a little excited, and I'll be re-adding this comic to my bookmarks. Maybe I'm getting my hopes up because of the nostalgia and why I liked this comic in the beginning, but, maybe, will it be an old friend and be like the good old days, or will my friend have changed too much and we won't get along? We'll see. I'll rate this comic as sometimes not safe for work, with some trigger warnings for people sensitive to distressing body-related situations, violence, and swearing. Once again, you can check that out at mysteriesofthearcana.com. And now, Comic of the Week. This week's Comic of the Week is Puck by Electric Gecko. Yes, that's the only name they're going with on their comic. So, bear with me on that. Puck is a comic that I've never knew about before, but started seeing ads around for it that showed me a very nice art style with a cute character. So I clicked. It didn't get me right away, as it took me several visits to get into the comic. Since then, I've read the whole archive. It's a little hit or miss, but I really love following the main character. There's not a whole lot of strip-style comics I follow, but this is one that's definitely staying in my bookmarks. Again, it boils right down to the characters, and you can find Puck at puckcomics.com. Mainly safe for work, implied violence, and some sexy situations here and there. That's it for this episode of the Webcomic Beacon at the webcomicbeacon.com. That's it for this week for the Webcomic Beacon. See you next time.